They see Islam as a marginalized group, and I wrote at one point that they can't see the victims for the brown people, and that's exactly what it is.
Hello and welcome to Deprogrammed, an unsafe space with Carter and Keri. We are glad you're joining us today. If it's your first time, Deprogrammed is a show that we do where we touch on, sometimes explore my old belief system. And today we're very excited to have a guest who I got to be on his show recently. So I'm so happy he can join us today. His name is Obaid Omer. He's the host of the Dangerous Speech podcast, where he explores first principles and how we came about them in conversations with academics, authors, journalists, and activists. Obaid was born in India, and his family moved to Canada when he was 6 years old. His work has taken him to war zones and disaster areas where he has seen firsthand what sectarian violence can do to a country and people. He is a proponent of Enlightenment values and free speech. And you guys can find Obaid on Twitter at Obaid Omer. It's Obaid Omer. And you can find his podcast on iTunes or SoundCloud or YouTube. It's called Dangerous Speech. And we'll put a link in the comments, Obaid. But welcome.
Oh, thanks. Hey, Carter. Hey, Keri, thanks a lot for having me on. And,
Hi, Carter.
Welcome. Thanks for coming.
And Keri, I got to say, you're doing your bit to, help the patriarchy and internalizing your misogyny, allowing me to mansplain to you again. So, thanks a lot.
Yes, I brought you on to do some mansplaining. Although, didn't we figure out last time in this the hierarchy of my old belief system, I don't know which of us is more marginalized. I have the lady points.
Yeah, I don't know. It's so insane.
Yeah.
It's got to be hard to think about that all the time and just doing those calculations. It's got to drive you crazy.
I don't know if think is the right word. I think they're running a sort algorithm on some, they got a list of attributes and they're just kind of sorting them constantly, but there's not really any thought that's happening. But that's a separate issue. I know Keri knows about you a little bit because she was on your show, but I'd just love to hear in your own words a little bit about your background and how you came to be doing dangerous speech and what's going on.
Yeah, sure. As Keri mentioned, my family moved to Canada from India when I was 6. We can get into this later, but Islam in India when my family moved here is a lot different than Islam in India and South Asia right now. It was a lot more laid back. So they weren't really fundamentalist or anything like that. They were pretty open. By the time I got to about 16 or so, just hearing about science and then, learning about the religion, it's these two things don't match up. And science won out, and that was that.
What do you mean by that? So you became, I know you said you were, the show Cosmos was really meaningful to you.
Okay, I was always a curious kid. So Cosmos comes on, and Sagan didn't give you facts. He talked about the scientific method, and he talked about curiosity. And he talked about weighing evidence. And that was right around the time I was starting, 6th grade or 7th grade. So it fit in, and then we started learning stuff about science. The first thing I learned that year was our sun's going to burn up in 5 billion years. And I come home and ask my parents about that as opposed to the Day of Judgment. And my parents are humming and hawing. And, well, that's the same thing. And I'm like, well, no, it just doesn't match. And just other things like that, the moon cracking in half. But there's no record of the moon cracking in half that, you'd hear about. Learning about basics of evolution. Just learning about basics of light and how old the universe was and things like that. And, new evidence comes along, you can prove things. And, Muhammad going from Mecca to Jerusalem and then to the moon on a flying donkey with the face of a man, and the fact that he has to catch a connection in Jerusalem, it's a little hard to believe.
I don't know this story, whatever it is you're talking about. I'm sorry, I'm totally ignorant.
Okay.
I kind of love it. I don't know it either, but this sounds awesome.
It's a thing called the night journey. And some people are now saying that it was a dream, or I don't know how, like where that debate comes in from. But apparently, he flew up to the moon, and he had to go. It's on a thing called a burak, which is various descriptions, but basically it's a winged donkey. Some people say that has a face of a man. Some people don't. Some people say it's been drawn with a peacock tail, whatever. I mean, the details don't really matter there. But yeah, he goes from Mecca to Jerusalem, and from Jerusalem to the moon. On the moon, he meets all the old prophets, and then God wants Muslims to pray 50 times a day, and then he goes back and forth, and he's speaking to the old prophets, and finally talks God down to 5 times a day. But yeah, so that was the story. And so I mean, like, I'm sorry, I can't believe that. It just.
No,
I like that he talked him down. How about just look, God, 50 is a little bit much.
But again, that was also like, I think it was the old prophets. Like, I can't remember if it was Moses or Abraham telling him, no, they won't accept that. You got to go back and ask for less. Because I mean, also if you I mean, Judaism and like Catholicism, especially if you look at the Old Testament, Abraham, before Sodom and Gomorrah get destroyed, he tries to convince God, like, if there's,
yes,
100 good people, if there's, how many good people do you need not to destroy the, so this whole thing was talking him down. I mean, I can't remember if it was Abraham or if it was Moses, but yeah. So that's the story.
I just want to clarify. I'm laughing for anyone watching who is Muslim and does believe this story. I'm laughing just because you're reminding me of. So I'm a pretty new Christian, and sometimes when I get excited about Bible stories and when I tell them, they sound ridiculous the way that I tell them. And so it just makes me laugh. Like, the telling of the story even is funny to me. And I've never heard this one, so it sounds like a fantastical story. I like it.
Yeah,
I think that there's a contention for, like, I think this is in competition with the Xenu story I talked about yesterday. This is a good one.
Yeah. So you were raised Muslim, and then you became, or would you say you identify? Or, I hate that word, identify.
Yeah.
Are you an atheist? Do you believe in God?
I don't believe in any kind of supernatural. I don't believe in any of that. There's no evidence for it. Sure, if evidence came out, something, I want to follow the evidence. So, like, more than anything, in that sense, I guess I'm, like, being an empiricist. I don't even want, I don't want to say agnostic or this and that, but I'll give it that very, very minute chance that if evidence exists, sure, because I can't know 100% yes or no. But yeah, I act as if there is nothing out there.
That's
I relate to that.
Yeah, Carter. I was going to say Carter probably relates to that. So then, tell us a little bit about your work, because one thing that was interesting to me in our previous conversation was how you talked about your job necessarily took you, I guess, a little bit away from the online world.
I saw an ad in a newspaper saying, "Would you like to work in Bosnia?" Working for the military. I applied. I got the job. I went to Bosnia. From there, the same company I was contracted with said, "Do you want to go to Afghanistan now?" And so I ended up doing that for about 13 years off late.
And so when you came back, what is it that led you to start the podcast? Like, what was it that you noticed? Or
okay. Yeah, so war zones, social media. Well, in 2002, I don't even know if MySpace or Friendster was around, but social media wasn't a thing on military bases. And when it did become a thing, and I could use it off the base, so when I'm going on holidays and stuff, I would use it to connect with friends, and that was it. And I wasn't paying attention to all the insanity. And I don't think in the early days there was much insanity. But I come back and, like, I left Afghanistan in 2013. In December, I got back to Montreal, March of 2014. I bummed around northern France for a little bit. And anyway, so then I look at everything, and it's, especially with the Islam thing, like the Ben Affleck thing, Ben Affleck, famously with Sam Harris, like, gross and racist. I think it was in 2000.
Wait, so for anybody who doesn't know that clip, it was Ben Affleck was on Bill Maher's show, right? Correct? With Sam Harris?
Yeah. And then Sam Harris and Bill Maher were talking about Islam, and Sam Harris was actually laying it out fairly well and fairly reasonably, and whatever, Batman went crazy.
I do remember. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I do remember being a little shocked because it sounded like Ben Affleck had probably just recently become friends with some woke people and was just repeating. He just started calling Sam Harrison as Islamophobic or something.
Well, he said that's gross and racist. I mean,
gross and racist.
Okay, but I mean, even just other little things like, just seeing it online and seeing Ayaan Hirsi Ali get attacked for being, the term Islamophobia was becoming rampant, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And she's being called a racist, and I'm like, in what world is Ayaan Hirsi Ali a racist? So I started seeing stuff like this, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And I mean, there was so much stuff going on all at that same time. If you look in from like 2014 to 2016, you had at Mizzou the journalism teacher who ended up getting fired, which is whatever. You can get into that, but she called for people to beat up a student journalist who was covering a protest at that university, and she's a journalism professor. Then there was a thing at Yale with the Christakises. Then Middlebury. Then there was Evergreen. Then there was Charlottesville. Then there was Berkeley. Then like one thing after another, and I found myself defending people I despise. Like I found myself defending Milo. Like the first time I heard Milo talk was some talk he gave Christina Hoff Sommer and Steven Crowder, and I was like, it's kind of funny. Like, whatever, this guy's being an ass, but it's kind of funny. And then the shtick got old because it's all it was. But I found myself defending Linda Sarsour because she's being stopped from coming into Canada at one point. I'm like, no, and she's an absolutely horrendous human being as far as I'm concerned. And it just, like, the majority of it was coming from, you want to call it the left? It was the left.
My side, my old side.
Yeah.
The SJW side.
There was some coming from the right, and there's more coming from the right now. You can start seeing it, and it's just like an overcorrection. But yeah, so like for me, the dangerous speech thing was okay. First of all, the title is kind of tongue in cheek, and that's why a friend of mine drew the picture. It's just two rabbits fighting because the speech is not that dangerous. And it's about as dangerous as two rabbits fighting, like Watership Down, set aside. But it's nonsense, and it's okay. I don't claim to be an arbiter of reason or anything like that. I try to be, but immigration. There's a conversation to be had on immigration about limits and what should be allowed and what shouldn't. What limits should be put in. How do we vet these people? And this conversation should be had calmly without, calling people, bigots and racists and Nazis, or you're just trying to wipe like white replacement or white genocide or whatever. Like that stuff. We can let them scream and whatever, but they can sit at the kiddie table and we can sit down like adults. And that's all I'm trying to do. I don't know if I'm succeeding or not.
When you say that you're a proponent of Enlightenment values, what does that mean to you, and how is the behavior that you're seeing here not in line with Enlightenment values?
Okay, Enlightenment values. So when I talk about Enlightenment values, I am looking more at, so Locke, Paine, Milton, Mill, Voltaire. That's what I'm looking at. The rights of the individual. Free speech, first and foremost, and free speech from the way Milton and Mill described it. I think the English arguments for free speech are the best. I think the U.S. gets it right as far as laws go, but I think the best arguments come from the English side. And a lot of people forget it. Hitchens was really good on this. Yes, the right to speak is very important. But the most important part of that debate is my right to choose what I wish to take in for myself. You denying me the right to ingest what I want, that is the greater offense in the free speech argument, as far as I can tell. Like Milton's work, Areopagitica, he says to give me the liberty to know, to utter, and to argue, according to conscience above all other liberties. The first thing he puts is the liberty to know, because if you don't know, your utterance and your argumentation is garbage. So like, to me, that's the first thing. Then, practice whatever religion you want. Don't force it down my throat. Your religion should not deny other people their rights. My rights, like my freedom to not have religion, should not deny the way you practice your faith, unless your faith is, I'll give you an absurd example, like human sacrifice, right? Like, I don't think anyone's going to tolerate that. And an example of this is where it's going the wrong way, and it's overcorrection, is there's a law in Quebec recently called Law 21. So certain government officials were not allowed to wear religious symbols. The way this law evolved was, first it was all government employees, so that would mean someone in like a DMV or something like that.
What?
And then they said, okay, we're going to try it out only with Muslims. And then there was an issue because there's a pretty large crucifix in one of the council rooms in the provincial legislature, and they weren't going to remove it because they said that's not part of secularism. In French, they call it laïcité. And then they passed the law again, but then they said, okay, it's only going to be for teachers and nurses and this and that. And okay, I despise. Now, I can't get on the side of the people who are opposed to this law, even though I am, because they're screeching and they're yelling and they're arguing the wrong thing, because it's all about racism, it's all about the hijab. And there can be a case made that that's what it was for. But my thing was, no freedom was gained after this law was passed. People lost liberties. And if you're saying that a government official and a teacher is wearing so like a crucifix, a Star of David, a yarmulke, a Sikh turban, a hijab, obviously. I don't know about Jewish. I don't know if there'd be like Orthodox Jewish teachers in public schools wearing the sheitel, or however it's pronounced, the wig that they wear sometimes. I don't know. And so, but if you're saying that is going to cause your child to become religion X, or it's an infringement, it's a government pushing something, you've got a really rough case here. And I'm like I said, this law is anti-enlightenment. You're taking away the freedoms. The government there should be a separation of church and state, and that separation should go both ways. The church should not go in and the state should not go in and tell the church how to operate, and it shouldn't dictate how people practice their faith. And
it also, I'm going to interrupt for a second, because my mind naturally goes to, well, where does that end? Because how do they define religion? I mean, you and I have talked about, and Carter and I talk about a lot, my old ideology, SJW ideology, I think of it as a religion. People, it works as a religion in their lives. So who's to say, I know it's a joke, but like blue hair is very common among SJWs. Who's to say you can't have blue hair now if you're a teacher, because that's a sign of, that's an extreme example, but I'm just saying, where does that stop? There's any number of symbols or physical things you could wear that would align you with a certain belief system.
See, I brought that up too. So like, this was done because in the name of protecting the feelings of those people who aren't religious, or if you're Jewish and you see a Muslim woman, or if you're Muslim and you see a Jewish person, whatever. I don't know the convoluted logic behind it. Like, oh, we want to promote secularism, right? All BS. Now, if I'm a religious person and the person, my teacher or my child's teacher is wearing an AIDS ribbon, and I'm a devout Christian, conservative Jew, Orthodox Jew, devout Muslim, homosexuality is against my, totally against my creed. That is a punishment by God on homosexuals. I don't like that. Take that pin off. Like again, then you have to do this. This is a right-wing version of doing that matrix of who is more oppressed. Do we give the religious rights? Do we give? And it's authoritarian. It's against the laws of the Enlightenment. So, like I said, when it comes down to Enlightenment, it comes down to basic individual freedoms. It's, the state should be there to protect your rights and obviously protect your liberty. So like, you incarcerate murderers, and it's, again, you can look at it as sort of as a social contract where we agree to give everyone these rights and we abide by that. If we take it away, then we agree to have our rights curtailed, it shouldn't be for retribution, it should be for rehabilitation, but I mean, it's a whole other conversation.
Well, you said something before that I think is I mean, I've seen people lose. This concept has been lost, it seems like, in culture for decades now, at least, which is this idea that rights shouldn't infringe on other people's rights. And you see the word rights being used to mean a lot of things that actually aren't what would be classically called rights from an Enlightenment perspective. And so there's like this right to not be offended, or the right to feel a certain way, right? And those things inherently infringe upon other people's rights. And I think part of the issue is that we're very sloppy with what we call rights, and we're not very diligent about protecting people's actual rights, regardless of how that makes other people feel or impacts them in any way or anything like that.
But I think part of the issue now too is, and I shouldn't speak with too much authority. I've got friends who are teachers and stuff. I'm not in the school system in Canada. I don't have kids, whatever. But there's a lack of some of like the old civic style classes, and I hear that as well from some teachers in the States and some people in the States. Like they've gotten rid of the old civics classes. Now, then I shouldn't say prattle on about rights, because rights are important, but like a very major important part of any democracy is, yes, the government will protect your rights, but citizens should remember that they have obligations. Like and again, this should not be vigilantism. This should not be like the social justice stuff or whatever, the right-wing version of it, but you're obliged to have some civic duty. I mean, like just stupid little things, like you're walking down the road and you see a bunch of dirt, like I'm not talking about every single cigarette butt, but you see like like someone threw a bag and it's there and the garbage can's right there, throw it in the garbage can. Walking down the road or whatever, you're driving down the road, you see a branch on the road, get it out of the way. Like just citizens have responsibilities, and whether it's just voting or being informed about what's going on, so that should be pushed as well. And it's not like a love of the state and you worship the state, but it's pride in where you are. Pride, if you want those rights and you think they're a good thing, you have some responsibility to try to keep them up and uphold them. I don't know how else to put it.
No, I get it. I think partly we've kind of run into the tragedy of the commons in some respect. Like when you have small communities, you can have people enforce things through social pressure a lot more. So if you're the guy who litters or doesn't bother to pick up the trash or whatever it is, your community can ostracize you in some way or kind of give you some social pressure to be a good member of the community and looking out for each other. But when you get beyond a community that's relatively small, actually, where people know each other, you end up with this kind of anonymity where people are kind of naturally lazy often and can get away with whatever they'll get away with, and so you end up with people getting away with whatever they can, and it's very difficult to police that. And if you've got a city of 5 million people, it's very difficult to police that kind of stuff in any formal way. You really need social pressure in order to do that.
But again, it shouldn't be about policing, and it shouldn't be about like indoctrinating kids in school or anything like that. But at the same time, when you're talking, like I said, when you're giving a kid civics class, you're talking about rights. That you can have a discussion about what the obligations of a citizen are, and so if kids talk about that and that discussion goes on, no one has to watch you do it. You shouldn't want, oh yeah, I picked up a bag of garbage, I should get a prize for it. Like it shouldn't. It should just be, okay, you know what? I don't want my neighborhood to look like a pigsty. And like I said, I'm not perfect at this. I walk down the street and I'll flick a cigarette butt. I'm a little bit of a hypocrite here, but like I said, but those kind of things.
But you also will pick up a cigarette butt once in a while.
Yeah, okay, yeah, like I said, I'll pick stuff up and whatever, but that's just, but like I said, we should, I think, all try to think more of, yes, we have rights that the government is meant to protect, not to give us. We shouldn't think of them as given to us by the government. They're just there to protect it. But we should do something on our own end too, like to improve our lot.
Yeah, I kind of want to push back on that a little bit, because as a guy who's a small government guy who sees our rights being violated just more severely over the last several decades, every year they get worse and worse. It's hard to motivate me to contribute back to some society that's basically intent on taking my rights away and driving me into authoritarianism.
Okay, there's a different story. Now, I'm talking about if this was... Now, we can get into the argument of like how much that, how many rights have been taken away. And I do believe in Canada and in the United States that a lot of civil liberties have been lost, especially since 9/11. You can go back, like in the U.S., go back to the Patriot Act and all that. And there's been certain things here in Canada as well. I have no issue with that. But we still have a lot more rights, and we're a lot freer. Certain things have been scaled back. We still have the right to talk about those things and try to curtail, like try to push back the government any ground we lost on our rights, we can try to take them back. Like organizations from FIRE are doing it. Freedom from Religious Foundation is doing certain things on like they're doing it more on the religious front. FIRE is doing it on the free speech front. So there is,
and that's what we do as part of our show is partly that.
So, but again, that I believe is part of the obligation. Okay, so let's take something like burning the flag, right?
Yep.
I fully believe that if you believe in the First Amendment, someone has a right to burn the flag as a protest. Now, my question to the person burning it is, why are you burning it? What are you protesting? I can see two major reasons. One is America is a horrible place. It's disgusting. I want it all to burn to the ground. The flag is a symbol of America. I want to burn it to the ground. Fine. I may disagree with your reasoning, but at least your protest matches your reasoning. If, on the other hand, your reasoning is America was once a great country, it stood for a lot of beautiful things, the Constitution is amazing, but now it's been overrun by whatever commies or bigots or fascists or whatever you want to say it's been overrun by, and they're ruining the flag. The flag doesn't stand for what it is anymore. I'm going to burn the flag down. Again, I may agree with your argument, but in this case, I disagree with your protest. Because if you believe that the flag stood for something at one point, you believe that America, the Constitution, everything stood for something good, but now it's being overrun by X, and you don't want to associate with that symbol. Have the courage to take that symbol back for what it means. Like it's the wrong protest.
That makes sense to me, and
I agree
you're
with that.
You're saying you should be defending. These values. Yeah,
exactly. And I mean, again, I'm probably really bad at this, and hypocrisy writ large. But I think we should spend more time defending what we want to defend instead of like the woke stuff, the SJW stuff. That is a constant attack. Even the red pilled crap, on the right side, it's a constant going for attack. You know what? This is what I like. This is what I'm going to uphold. This is what I'm going to defend. Come at me, I'll defend myself. There's too much shit out there to go looking for stuff. I mean, I know there's people who are very focused, like friends of mine who are focused on fighting enforced hijab. And that's good, great. You're doing something, that's awesome. And I get it. But they're also at the same time doing it in the defense of human rights, right? And I'm saying there should be some of it, at least at one point, saying, we're going to hold the flag here. You guys go fight the good fight. We'll hold the flag. And if you're not going to do anything else, at the very least, just defend the rights you want to uphold.
Do you think people even understand what that means, though? I mean, this is kind of what I was getting at before with the word rights. Like, I don't, you have, I imagine, a pretty solid grasp of what individual rights and liberties are. You've read a lot of Enlightenment thinkers. But I think the average person, at least in America, maybe it's different in Canada, but I think the average person in the U.S. Doesn't, right. A right is what Bernie Sanders talks about. You have a right to free college, or you have a right to health care. Like, there's no distinction between that and free speech. And even for something like free speech, you're seeing, well, you have the right to free speech unless the words are, someone else has a right to not be offended. And like, do you think they even understand enough to do what you're asking of them?
Okay, so let's change the word rights to first principles. And now this is, again, something I've been playing around with this for like a little over a year, because I was getting, and like the way I would talk about free speech, and the way you hear a lot of people talk about free speech, like, so free speech, individual freedoms, like freedom of religion, assembly, like all those things, like practice, like the freedom to live your life according to how you want to live it. Like, let's just call those first principles. And there's two ways to look at them. I used to say, and a lot of people say free speech is the foundation of all other rights. Like, like we build it on the bedrock of free speech. And you're talking about like something that's solid and rigid in its foundation. I think that's a wrong way to look at first principles. I think there's two types of systems. There's a foundational system where you have that rigid foundation that'll never change. You build your structure around it. Once that structure is built up, you think those are your rights and those are your laws. You're forgetting your first principles until it cracks and gets damaged. I think the way we should look at our first principles is think of it like a garden. And your first principles are the earth and whatever you put in there, nutrients, everything. And then all the other rights spring up. So, right to free education, let's just say, if you want to discuss that. That's something you plant and it grows. If it mixes well with everything else and it succeeds, it's a plant. If it starts killing stuff off, it doesn't. It's a weed. You take it out. But
that's a really cool analogy.
But the underneath of it, the dirt and the ground, it's not like a foundation of a house where you forget about it. If you don't take care of it, if you don't water it, if you don't add nutrients when you need it, if you don't make sure that there's nothing on one side that's killing it out, you're always aware of what those first principles are. So maybe change. Like, I think maybe have like Sam Harris a few years ago said, he talked about the narrative. So any narrative, like a narrative around any given narrative. I think maybe we have a conversation about how we want to have these conversations. Do it with yourself. Try to like figure out what you think your first principles are, where you come from, and use that as the lens you'll look at how you solve issues. And for myself, I want to use, empiricism. I want to use reason and logic and scientific method and discourse and the dialectic. And if you want to use something else, that's fine. But let's work. Like, I want to know where you're coming from, because we might not be able to have a conversation then. I don't know.
Well, but you said something earlier. I don't think you used the phrase natural rights, but you implied natural rights. You said very clearly these rights don't come from the government; they're protected by the government. I assume you're making a natural rights argument when you say that. No?
Yeah. Okay. That's okay. And it's not like, okay, these rights are given to us by our Creator. I think if you look back. David Deutsch described it as pockets of enlightenment. So if you look back at like these little pockets, and they built on one on each other. I mean, like if you go back to the Greeks, they had slaves, and there was only certain people were allowed to vote and speak and all that. But those thoughts came out. So I think that if we allow ourselves to think freely, and if we allow ourselves to talk freely, that these rights will naturally come out, because reasonable people are going to find that this is the best way that we can all get along well. I mean, unless you want to do like, okay, you can try to push for an authoritarian system, but then be ready for what Rawls called the veil of ignorance, because once that system comes in, Robespierre wasn't too happy with what happened after the French Revolution, right? Like, you don't know. So
heads will roll is your point.
Yeah, but so I'm thinking like if you, so like you had the Greeks, and you can go back and you had the first Islamic golden age. I don't like that name. Then you look at the Methazelites a little bit later, the Enlightenment, and then you can find other periods throughout history where these, for a little bit of time, these kind of thoughts came out. And I think these kind of thoughts naturally come out when open, free exchange of ideas can happen. And then we start realizing that this is the best way to go. So I'm not saying that they were put here by a creator. I'm not saying that
Well, I'm an atheist. I'm not trying to tell you you're saying that they're put here by a creator, but natural rights doesn't mean creator rights.
Yeah,
right?
but I think those rights, if there's no discussion, if we don't talk about it, if we don't do anything else about it, if we just let ourselves run wild and no introspection, no nothing, and just let our baser instincts take hold, I don't think those rights will come about. But if we can actually take the time to sit and discuss and work it out, I think those rights will naturally come about. I don't know. Maybe I'm optimistic. I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of trouble following because the way that maybe it's just the way, a problem with how I'm thinking about it, but like, I view it as like, obviously we need to sit down and discuss things and ascertain what rights are proper, but this is a philosophical question, right? This is the field of ethics and philosophy, and so the question is like, which rights are supported? I also, by the way, reason and evidence. I mean, I'll take reason and evidence where they lead me, right? So, I think making an argument that there are better ways to be thinking about things than other ways. For example, reason and evidence gets you farther than hopes and dreams. Then, if that's your method, I think we've hammered out, like, Enlightenment thinkers and pre-Enlightenment thinkers have hammered out some of the basic ideas of human rights and some of the things that are necessary for survival of man qua man. So I think it seems like that's actually not work that hasn't been done to a large part. I mean, there's always more to be done there, and there's always nuances and stuff like that. But it seems like I guess what I'm getting at is, we're talking about this word rights, and I hear you saying that first principles is really how you would rather think about it. But things like free education are very clear. You don't have to like plan it and wait to see how it interacts. It's very clearly undermines the concept of personal like ownership and private property, like, which is fundamentally like you own yourself, you own the product of your own labor, you own who you are. Like, these are Enlightenment ideas. And so free education there's no being in the sky giving things away from free, so it means you got to take it from someone else, and taking something from someone else is a violation of the rights. It's like, it's not that complicated. Why is it seeming very complicated during this discussion, I guess, is my question.
I think free education as opposed to free speech, I think they're two separate things, right? I think free education, so like when I talked about like having like a free principle, like free education would be, okay, up to now we've had to pay for college, right?
Yep.
All right. So if someone wants to come in, because you're not talking about K through 12, you're talking post-secondary, because K through 12, you can go to public school, you can get an education, right?
Well, you can, but there's an argument to be made that also shouldn't be paid for. So we can talk about either one.
Okay, but like right now, K through 12 is free. Like, we're not talking about making that free, right? Like in the States, you're not talking about making K through 12 free. No, at the moment, there's a K through 12 public system in the States, right?
Yes.
Okay, so at the moment, anyone talking about free education is only talking about post-secondary.
Except for people like me who are saying, let's get rid of free education for K through 12, but okay.
Okay. The majority, right? I mean, like,
Yeah, I got it. So
people,
Bernie, Elizabeth Warren, the conversation is about free college. I totally agree with you. Got it. Yep.
Okay, fine. Now, that is not a first principle. That is something like, if you have all those other first principles, now then you can come into, okay, are you taking my taxes? Is that attacking my individual rights? Blah 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 blah. You can, if you have those first principles set up, you can then have a system set up where you can talk about this, right? This free education, I do not consider a first principle. Free education would be something like that grows out of the ground of those first principles. Okay, the first principles set up the system so you can talk about it. Whereas if it's an authoritarian system, they come in and say, sorry, you're doing this. If you don't, the tax collectors are coming to your door with, henchmen and axes. Like, that's the foundational system. I'm saying, and that's their first principles.
I like the analogy of the garden, because what he's saying, it allows people to engage in thought experiments and have conversations with people who do believe something like I believe in, somebody who believes in free college. You can talk with them about it in this way, and if you both agree on the same what Obaid's calling first principles, and you have the same earth, right? Then you can see, does this thing that we want to grow in it, I like your analogy to a weed. Is it going to kill other things, or is it actually going to grow here? And I think that would help them see, well, some things that's actually going to kill some other things, or it might, or, it's just sort of helps them, I think, helps people engage in a thought experiment better.
It makes sense, right? You're talking about that, Keri and I have talked about, like the people need to understand kind of the values upon which Western civilization was built as their foundation. And then you have conversations after that about what to do with that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Well, I like in the analogy too that you're contrasting you're saying think of it like a garden, not like a foundation of a house, which is interesting to me, because a lot of times I've been thinking about belief systems like a house. And for example, I razed my house to the ground and had to started building a new one. But if you think of it like a garden, like you're saying, I liked your point about how you need to water it and attend to it, and that resonates with me, because it makes me think of the way I've started to think about just other things like spiritual growth, or empathy, growing empathy, how it's not something you do once. It's like going to the gym. You have to attend to it. You can't just go to the gym once and be fit. You have to practice empathy all the time. You're not just like, oh, I was empathetic once and now I'm an empathetic person. No, you have to, like, it's an exercise. It's like watering your garden. You have to water it. And I never really thought of first principles as something you have to attend to, but that makes sense. They probably are. And now I'm thinking about what a bad gardener I am in real life, and how I need to get better so I can get better at my philosophical garden.
Okay. The free speech argument in the States, right? So people kept thinking of it as a law. Oh, well, the government can't attack my speech. The government can't attack my speech. But now it's gotten to the point where I keep hearing it. Well, that's a private company. It's not the government. They can do what they want. Yes, they can. But, Google is our store of information, right? And Google should decide whether they're going to be librarians or landlords. If they're going to be and they should be librarians as far as I'm concerned. If they're going to be landlords, give us a clear lease and apply it equally across the board. But if you think about it as only laws, it's not the government doing it. It's just Google. It's just Facebook. It's just Twitter, right? We should think of it not as a law, but as a principle. Like, that law is based on the principles that were written about by Milton and Mill and Voltaire and Paine and Locke. And, the law is great, but live your life, and companies should live, especially media companies, they should live according to that principle. And this, it's a private company, they can do what they want, it's not the law. I think that therein lies the issue with the laws. Like, you have the laws in Europe, where Holocaust denial laws, and you look at the Loi Gassot in France, and they just knocked down the blasphemy law in Ireland. I mean, it's so when you have these laws like the Holocaust denial laws, people forget really what happened, because it happened because we know it happened because the law tells us to. We have free speech because we have it because the law tells us, and if enough people don't like free speech, the law can be changed.
Yeah, and something you're getting at that I think is super important, it's a passion of mine, is this idea that, like, there's a difference between what legally we would support and what we would support kind of morally and in society. And so, like, I would argue that, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I would argue, like, yes, Google may have rights to do things that I don't like from it. Rights in quotes, like, legally they can do X, Y, and Z. But as a society, we should push back on them doing X, Y, and Z if X, Y, and Z is against what I would consider Enlightenment values. This should be something that is frowned upon. They should be pressure put back on them. Everything doesn't have to come through a law. We can monitor our own environment and use other means that voting with your dollars, ostracism, argumentation, all that stuff can be used to push back on something that could be technically legal, and it can maybe should remain technically legal.
Okay, but I agree with all that, and I agree that you have the right to do all that, but sometimes that leads to Macy's pulling some plates that are really stupid that, no one should have bought anyways because they weren't even that funny, but someone got pissed off because it was fat shaming and it caused eating disorders. So Macy's...
Wait, what?
Yeah, so I get that, but... Oh, sorry, Keri, do you not know the story?
No, what's this example?
Okay, Macy's put out these really stupid plates. I think it was last Christmas or just before something. In the center it said skinny jeans. In the middle it said regular jeans. On the outside circle it said fat jeans or mom jeans. Some blue check mark on Twitter complained, and
I can already see where this is going. Yeah.
Eating disorders and fat shaming. Okay, so like that like yes, ostracized, whatever, but like this Google thing, like we have to start being braver, for Christ's sakes. When the ACLU puts out a warning about the fucking OK symbol, right? When I have to listen to why Baby It's Cold Outside is rape culture, when Apu is fucking racist. Give me a fucking break. Jesus Christ, come on.
Well, but this is the issue. Like, I'm going to use the word police. I don't actually mean police. I'm using it metaphorically. Society can only police behavior that's in line with Enlightenment first principles if society itself, if the culture itself understands and supports first principles. So if you're not teaching that stuff anywhere and no one understands any of those first principles that you're talking about, then most people will be quiet, and maybe you'll get some radical person who's upset about plates at Macy's, and that's the only pressure Macy's feels. When in a more, we'll say, educated or a society that's more in line with Enlightened values fundamentally, kids would grow up being horrified at some of the things that Google does, and you would have entire generations of people pushing back on some of this behavior. But we just don't, because we're in a broken culture.
We have a dearth of information at our fingertips. We're getting dumber. We're being algorithmed into ignorance, right? The algorithm is giving us what it thinks we want. I don't know if kids are being taught properly how to do research. Like, going to school, here's the card catalog in the library, this is where the books are, you go to the reference section, you know what you're getting. You go to the fiction section, you know what you're getting, right? You go to science, you go to geography, you know what you're getting. You go to Google, you put in a Google search. If I was doing a deep dive into the lunacies of Richard Spencer, and I did a Google search on something related to him, I'm going to get some horrific results, right?
Yep.
And I keep talking about this, and it's just a simple thing Google could do, right? You type in a search result into Google, like you go to the search page, you type in whatever you want to look up. It gives you back a page with tabs, and you can figure out a common way of how to categorize it. I say use the Library of Congress catalog system, right? So then you have science, history, geography, fiction, biographies, internet searches or whatever, right? And so if you're a kid doing a history project on the Civil War and you type in Civil War, you go to the history tab, you get all the history.
Well, but the issue with that is the history is also written by people with agendas, history in particular. So, I mean, really the right way to do history research is not to go to Howard Zinn, but to go to first, original source material, right? Which is very difficult to find. There's just too much information on the internet right now, and there's lots of...
I give you that, but that one little thing would make Google so much better than it is now. And if in tandem, you give, when you give people, you go to the card catalog at a library, if you go to a big university library, maybe some of them will have the protocols of the Elders of Zion in there, right? Maybe they will.
Yep.
You can find that in there. It doesn't mean, and you could find it in a reference section, because it is a reference to something that was put out, and it is, here's what this conspiracy was, blah, 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 blah. You can find that in there.
But now you're asking Google to be the arbiter of what's fact and what's not fact.
I'm not asking them to do that. I'm saying if they, like I said, take the Library of Congress, right? if they use their classification system and
right,
said,
but
okay,
someone has to decide what book gets classified by what, right?
Okay, but Google is using the U.S. government's classification at this point, right? Now you can say, okay, do you trust the U.S. government or not, or whatever? But if in that sense, instead of Google going out and hiring diversity officers and all this BS, they went out and hired librarians, and maybe not from the Library Journal that said to go burn all the white canon, but if they actually went
right,
and hired,
not from Yale,
yeah. So if they hired actual librarians, then librarians.
I don't know.
Okay, no, but
yeah. I hear what you're saying.
I'm not saying this is perfect. Look, this is a little quick thing. I'm just saying, just making that division would be better, right?
I do agree. I like where you're going with this, and what you're thinking out loud, and I agree that when you do a search result, it all comes it just everything. It's one big mass of things, but and they're already the Google employees are ranking things, and so the search results you're getting are not even based on what's the most popular results. You're not even getting the real popular. They are manipulating it based on ideology already. So,
I'm not a fan of Google, and I agree that there's a lot of problems, but I just need to push back on this entire idea. Like, I think it's good that you get crappy information, because ultimately what you need is to teach responsibility, and it's like you need to be responsible for vetting information yourself and finding it, and relying on Google or the Library of Congress to tell you these are the facts. I think is a really dangerous, potentially you're opening the door to authoritarian thought police, because that will absolutely happen. It already happens on Wikipedia.
Okay. I'm sorry, but empirically it doesn't. The way, like...
What do you mean?
Milton, Locke, Paine, even like take Rousseau, who was anti-Enlightenment, take all these writers. They got it through books. They studied in universities, in libraries, where the information was divided. Bertrand Russell, Newton, Einstein, Hawking, like Sam Harris, Richard Dawkins, Jonathan Rauch, all these people that have studied, and like the philosophers that have come up and the writings that have been done, they've gone through these systems where these library systems, they divided this information. They went and got that information. So if Google acts as a library, I mean, like we already have that system where we're allowing someone to be the arbiter of what's there. Now, like I said, you can have a separate web section. Like this could be for, here's for like, the American Journal of Medicine, like books that have come out, books that have been published, everything like that. That could be one section. You can have one section for the web, which is blog posts and videos and whatever people have done. You can sift through that if you want. But if you want actual, like, at one point or other, I mean, yes, we're gonna have to put some faith in something, but we've already had this system where, like, quantum physics that is allowing us to talk like this came out of that system where the information was vetted in that way.
But the difference is, and by the way, I'm not saying that there's no like value in some future version of internet search where information is categorized and vetted in some way by various entities. Absolutely, there's an information overwhelm. But I guess my point is, look, the fact that, first of all, the fact that that's the way everyone did it in the past that's because there was no internet. So like you could say, like, of course Einstein did it that way because that was the only way to do it. Books would only get published through. There was kind of, especially in the technical field, there's a semi-peer review kind of expertise vetting system, even just to get a book published. Libraries would buy. Presumably libraries from universities at some point would try and buy the books that were the most informative and the most accurate, and not buy, if I write some stupid pamphlet, Cambridge isn't going to carry it in their library in 1902, right? That's not going to happen. Whereas now, if I write a pamphlet and put it online, you can get it from Cambridge's library while you're sitting on a computer. So I get that. I'm not opposed to that. I guess I was just pushing back on the idea of like Google being the company to do this, and that bothers me.
I don't want Google to be it. Sorry, I don't want Google to be it, but they're what we've got right now. So until we can come up with a better system, let's try to optimize it as much as we can.
Do you think Wikipedia is an attempt to do that? Because I kind of view that as an attempt to sort of do that.
But I mean, it's like reading the Encyclopedia Britannica as opposed to reading, the rise and fall of the Third Reich.
Well, but Wikipedia would source the rise and fall of the Third Reich as it probably.
Yeah, so does the Encyclopedia Britannica, but then you have to go read it, right? If you just rely, it's a good initial source to get other sources. That's the only way I put it.
Can I make a request that we move on just a little bit?
Yeah, this is fun, but probably a tangent, so we should move on. Yes.
I would like to ask you about. I know you're not an expert and you're not a scholar in this area, but I just thought you had some good insights, and you definitely have more knowledge than I do about Islam. And I had a question to pose to you that Carter and I have talked about before a couple times, which is, why do you see, coming from someone who's a former Muslim and I'm a former SJW, why do you think those two ideologies make like such strange bedfellows at times? Why are they united on some things?
This stuff now, like the current, and it's not Marxist or whatever, like this SJW stuff, like critical theory, like intersectionality and all that, part of it, like the post-colonial theory, it focuses on white oppression. It focuses on someone else causing the problems. All the apologism for Islam, well, I shouldn't say all of it, majority of it, if you go back, the first wars that Islam fought, they were wars of defense because they were attacked. Yes, Muhammad was attacked because he led raiding parties onto merchant trains, and the governments got pissed off and attacked his bandits. So yes, they were defensive in that sense. So it's always the fault of someone else. So I think that plays a part of it.
Meaning, you're saying all the wars were the fault of someone else, so that aligns with SJW ideology, which is about blaming
someone else. You're the victim. I'm always the victim. It's never my fault. It was always an external thing that that brought me down. I like there's a similarity there, I think. I'll give you two different examples of Muslim women who are using this stuff right now. There's Mona El-Atawi and there's Linda Sarsour. Mona is an Egyptian woman. I believe she lives in Australia now. I could be wrong about that, but she was recently on Australian television, and they took the clip off where she's like, if you go low, I'll go even lower. Fuck the patriarchy, wow. Fuck white men, fuck civility, because civility is a term used by white men, blah, 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 blah. Just completely off the deep end, right? Like, you're not bringing anyone to your cause with that. I'm sorry. Like, you're only preaching to the choir and you're not helping anyone at all. Linda Sarsour, she's preached for Sharia. She took over the Women's March. If I can find the article, yeah. I'll send it to you, like how she actually took that over. I mean, she was on the board. Tamika Mallory was on the board. I think they've both been taken off. There was one person who was taken off right away, and she was convicted for terrorism in Israel. Linda Sarsour is called, I think it was her, or it was either her or Tamika Mallory, who called Louis Farrakhan the greatest of all time.
It was Linda Sarsour.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's just horrible people, but they speak in the language. Okay, Linda, she's clever, but I don't say she's like hyper intelligent. Like, if you get what I mean, like she's not dumb, but so she can game this. Like, any of this stuff is easy to be gamed. Like, if you just say the right things in the right tone at the right time, you're in. So she talks about privilege, and she talks about being oppressed, and she talks about being marginalized, blah, 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 blah. She plays up on that, and she speaks that language. And like I said, for some Muslims, it gives them that. Oh, here's our victim. So Mona El-Atawi does it that way. Linda's doing it, as far as I can tell, she's doing it to leverage, to get some power. If Bernie gets in, I would hate to see, I dread Bernie getting in and Linda sitting at the table. Like, I really do.
She's also the one who said, I just want to, for anybody listening who's not aware, she first came on my radar when you mentioned Ayaan Hirsi Ali earlier, and Sarsour first came on my radar because she was attacking Ali and saying that her vagina should be taken away. And she was saying that about a woman who was the victim of female genital mutilation. And she was saying it in this way. I think it had two meanings. One meaning was just that she was saying you don't deserve to be a woman, which is it's like this is part of my old ideology, which is they claim to be all about these quote unquote marginalized groups, but if you're a member of one of these marginalized groups and you don't speak their ideology, they hate you. And so she was basically saying, Ayaan Hirsi Ali doesn't speak our ideology. She doesn't deserve to be called a woman. But the other thing she was doing there, I think she did know. I think she's the type of personality type who knew what she was saying about her female genital mutilation. I think she knew that it would be interpreted that way as well. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, she directed that at Ayaan Hirsi Ali and Bridget Gabriel. And Bridget Gabriel, whatever, she's like, I think she's from Lebanon. I can't remember if she's ex-Muslim or she's an ex-Christian or still a Christian, but she's like the Candace Owens of the Middle East. Like, she lives in America, but she's like a Middle Eastern Candace Owens. But yeah, Star said, like, these people aren't real women. I want to take their vaginas away or something like that. Yeah, I mean, okay. She won an award for fighting anti-Semitism, which is really funny. And if I can find the video, I'll send it to you. In the last 2 minutes of her acceptance speech, she talked about how the lies through the Jewish media were smearing her. And she's winning an award for fighting anti-Semitism.
I mean, do you think, look, as someone who's a self-proclaimed proponent of Enlightenment values, do you think part of it is just a common enemy where you've got is in radical Islam and social justice? They just both want the destruction of Enlightenment values, and they both imagine that their values will be the replacement values.
I think with the Linda Sarsour types, I think their goal is to have these people as useful idiots, and then once, like in Iran, like the Ayatollahs sided with the communists. Once the revolution happened, the Ayatollahs consolidated power and the communists were kicked out. I think that's the way. Again, I have no definitive proof. It's just my feeling. A group like CARE, that's their ultimate goal. Side with these people, get a foothold into power, establish ourselves, and then take over.
So that explains why those groups side with the social justice warriors. Why do the social justice warriors
I don't know, because they see Islam as a marginalized group. Okay, because so Islam, they can't. Okay, I'm a horrible writer.
So it's just a virtue signal.
I don't even think it's a virtue signal. It's just part of their. That's the way, like you said, they don't even think. It's just programmed. Like they follow protocol, and that's where the protocol kicks in. And I wrote at one point that they can't see the victims for the brown people. And that's exactly what it is.
Earlier, before we started the show, I was asking about whether there was a possibility of a reformation in Islam, and you corrected me about reformation generally. But I'm going to kind of pose the same question so you can kind of give the audience this answer. And that was like, with Christianity, we kind of have a milder version of Christianity. A lot of people think of that as having gone through the Reformation, and the question is, like, can Islam go through a reformation that makes everyday Islamic practice more compatible with Western culture?
Okay, Reformation, no, right? And even the Christian, like we had mentioned before, the Christian Reformation, like people think it was, Martin Luther went and nailed those, 99 grievances to the wall of the cathedral, and everything was like all peace and sunshine afterwards. No, Martin Luther was not asking for relaxation of the church rules, right? He was asking for relaxation. He was asking to get away from the yoke of the Catholic Church. He was asking to get away from the yoke of all that tradition. He wanted to go back to a more fundamental, he wanted to go back to the original text and the original books and forget the priesthood and do it with the Trinity. And I can't remember how many took out a couple of books and merged a couple together, and his Bible was slightly different. So there was all that.
He was more fundamentalist, though, in modern terms.
Yeah. And I mean, he wanted to burn serfs. he wasn't kind to Jews. He was not a nice person. And so Christianity lost its power because of, the Reformation was an attack from the inside. Then you had the Enlightenment. You had science growing up. You had things coming out. So, in England, you had the Church of England coming up. So that was another attack on the church. All these things got Christianity to start denuding its power. Islam has never had anything like that. Islam, the Reformation that happened in Islam, the most latest one, if you want to call it that, was the Wahhabist, which is going back again to the original text, reintroducing this thing called bid'ah, which is there's no innovation in the faith, and a lot of it means there's no innovation whatsoever. But if you want to look at Islam today, and what's going on right now, and let's say from the middle of the 20th century to now, Islam was pretty static. Nothing was really changing. There was not much innovation because of colonialism. You had the Ottomans until World War I, then Europe was in North Africa and in the Gulf, and it was only until oil exploration, which I guess was about the middle of the 20th century, that it really started going, that more and more people started coming in, so newer and newer ideas came in. So Dubai was not built until the 50s or the 60s. Right. Jeddah and Riyadh were not really built up until the 50s or the 60s. It was just all oil money and stuff coming in, and new ideas coming in. So you could see the Middle East opening up a little bit. A lot of it was enforced secularism. So these were dictators that were put in. Like I said, it was going on during the Cold War. So you had influence by the Soviets, you had influence by the British, the French, the Americans. So 79 was a really, again, this is my interpretation, how I think on this. 79 was a very, very important year. You had two major things happen. You had the Islamic revolt in Iran, and then in August or November of 79, in Mecca, in Saudi Arabia, Mecca was, during the Hajj, terrorists took over Mecca. Now, Saudi Arabia tried to contain that, the news, for a while, but they had to end up making agreements with the mullahs, and then the mullahs called these people back, and then the mullahs gained more power. Now in 79, when Iran had the Islamic Revolution, in 1980 they started spreading a radicalized version of Shia Islam and their version of Shiaism, and they started putting money into it because they hadn't had sanctions fully yet, I don't think, at that point, and they started putting their stuff out, and there was going to Shia centers around the world, and then there was the Iran-Iraq War. Saudi clerics, to counter that, were pushing the Saudi government, to put out Salafi Wahhabist Islam, because that's what was being practiced in Saudi Arabia. That's what these clerics wanted. And so Saudi started spreading money. In India, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, parts of the Philippines, this money started funneling in. Because of everything that happened in 79 led up to all this stuff going out, and you're seeing hardening in those countries, and it's weird, in the Middle East, you're seeing more and more people pushing back. You're seeing the citizenry pushing back against the orthodoxy, and they don't want any of it, whereas in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Indonesia, the citizenry has been brainwashed enough in the last 20 years that they want more of it. And it's weird, because both of this is because of increased information. In the 80s, better satellite communications, better, more things, easier to get them now with the internet. In the Middle East, they're getting stuff from the internet, and they're looking for stuff from freedom, but these countries were already starting to get tougher, and there wasn't a lot of investment in Pakistan. There was not a lot of investment in Bangladesh. There was no reason for people to go there. There's a reason for people to go to the Middle East. So you had Bell and oil companies or whatever going in, and new ideas coming in more and more. If you look at what happened in the Arab Spring, you look at we were talking about an organization earlier, Ideas Beyond Borders, where they translate books on science and philosophy into Arabic, Farsi, and Kurdish, and they make them available for free. They put out a call for translators. In the first day, they got 15,000 people in the region wanting to translate them, because there's such a hunger for these books.
Wow.
In Pakistan in 2017, a cleric, there's a sect of Islam called Ahmadis. Ahmadis, think of them sort of like the Mormons of Islam. There's a clause in Pakistani government, and I think for a lot of oaths of office, like even like it's for teachers and stuff like that, where you have to say Muhammad's the last prophet. This is to stop Ahmadis from getting any kind of power, right? So some clerical error at the end of 2017, I believe it was 2017, took that part out of the oath, and on a perceived relaxation by the government, the population went crazy and started rioting. So it was the population stopping the government from relaxing, even though the government wasn't. Whereas in the Middle East, it's the population. It's a grassroots push to get, what we call Western values or enlightened values. They want those there. They're hungering for them. So Islam is a really strange thing, like right now.
Certainly, I think there's not a lot of transparency into a lot of these Muslim nations, so it's not clear from the West always what's happening, and what's compatible with Western values and what isn't.
The three things, if you really want to get an understanding, is the Quran, the Sirah, and the Hadith. The Quran, obviously, it's the book. The Sirah is the life of the Prophet. You can find one. It's either Ibn Ishaq or Ibn Hisham. Because one wrote it, and then it got lost, and only notes survived, and then the second guy who wrote it built up on his notes. So I can't remember which one wrote which. And then the Hadith are the sayings and the doings of the Prophet. What are considered the most accurate Hadith are the Bukhari, but then there's also there's one set of Hadith that apparently are the Angel Gabriel's Hadith, so those are absolutely authentic. And I mean, the Hadith, you can have rulings from, I don't know if this is in the Quran or the Hadith, but if a fly dips a wing in your drink, catch the fly and dip the other wing in it, because one wing will have the poison and the other will have the antidote. So you have, pieces of wisdom.
So important stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, okay, the people who are just pure Quranists without the Hadith, you don't really have the instructions of how to pray.
I guess my fundamental question is Islam, I hear people in the West say that, some people in the West say that Islam is both a religion and a political ideology kind of mixed in one in a way that other religions like Christianity aren't. Would you agree with that assessment, or is that not accurate?
Christianity gave itself an out with render unto Caesar's that which is Caesar's, and render unto God that which is God's. It gave itself that out. Islam has nothing like that. From the start, it was, you push Islam on the people. It was spread by the sword. Some people accepted it and took it in instead of being conquered. If you converted to Islam, you couldn't be taken a slave. So some people decided, I'd convert, not be a slave. There's that. But Islam, in and of itself, it is a wholly totalitarian system. And that's where the Sufi thing comes in now. Like right now, Sufis are thought of to be as mystics, blah, 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 blah. The whole point of Sufism is do not study anything except for within the love of Islam. Do not study anything except for the glorification of Islam. All things are for the glory of it. And someone like, I mentioned to you before, Keri, Al-Ghazali, who is a Sufi, he took it that far. And he curtailed the study of science. And so in and of itself, if you just read the book, I don't think you could say this is a political system. But once you read that book, like if you read critical theory, it talks about how to have racism. But if you take a political system and you say this book is how we build our political system, then that system is infused with critical theory, and it's going to be an awful thing. It's the same thing with Islam, I think. Like if you have Islam as a religion and you say this is how we should live our life, and I think that's where it came down was, this has to spread, this has to go to everyone, so we will live our lives according to these tenets. So then it became the political system where Sharia is a set of laws built on Islam, right? And so there is no way to separate the two at this point. Like I said, with Christianity you could do it. It gave itself an out. Islam didn't. So you have to change the way people think about it, and you have to change their thought patterns so that, like what they're talking about, what the youth are talking about in the Middle East now, like a civil society where they can build a society of rules and laws that aren't built on the rules that come out of a 1,400-year-old book.
Right.
I wanted to just remind people where they can find your work, though, find your podcast.
Okay, if you go on SoundCloud, just look for Dangerous Speech. Same thing on iTunes. YouTube, it's just my name. Or if you follow me on Twitter, Obaid Omer. Don't expect anything brilliant on Twitter. It's just me being a smartass, and that's about it.
Isn't that what Twitter's for?
Yeah, pretty much, I guess. Yeah, but yeah, I put out when I put out my podcast, or otherwise I make smarmy comments, and that's it.
And it's Obaid Omer, OBAID OMER. If you guys want to find him on Twitter.
Yeah, and we'll put all that stuff in the show notes. We'll put your Twitter handle and your podcast information all in the show notes. So, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot. It was great. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Have a nice day. Thanks for coming on.